scholarships and challenge where he's providing
I'm told by Nancy Knock that there will be coffee at 2:45, so not to say we don't need to cut our discussion. But if you see Maria diving down the hallway, let me just say that if you have found the Summer Institute useful or helpful or fun or if you have suggestions about more coffee and other substantive matters, that we do appreciate having you tell us those things, especially if you could send an email or a letter. It's always good for David and I to be able to collect up those kinds of comments, especially the good ones, and to use them when we apply to various organizations who might then be willing to support us in the future. So we really do appreciate those kinds of comments. Helpful suggestions are, though, of course, also welcome. And next year, wherever the Summer Institute is, there will be more coffee. Apparently, they drink less of it in Southern Virginia than they do in Northern Virginia. We'll correct for this. I know. So really, consumption me down here. Maria Pia Paganelli has been at all but one of our summer institutes, so 9 out of 10 of the summer institutes, and it's been wonderful to have her here, both as a graduate student, I think. I remember her driving me from BWI, Summer Institute, we always are conservative.
Maria knows how to drive.
I flew in there from Cleveland and as a graduate student, she picked me up and drove me. Yeah, Maria. So and I didn't know it was Maria, the driver. At the time, David just said, yeah, she'll drive you. And just 3 hours later, we arrived at George Mason. And no, we didn't get lost. And the car with no air conditioning and whatever else. So she's been there both as a graduate student and then for many years as a professor at Yeshiva University. And the paper which Michael was replying, or at least in part replying, was a paper that she presented at the Summer Institute many years ago and did so very bravely because Sam Hollander was in the audience and so was David Levy, and this is a paper that attacks both of them. So it was extraordinary. And you don't attack Sam Hollander without expecting that he's going to come right back at you. So that was good fun. And that paper appeared then in 2003 in Pope. And so there are many indications. In fact, Becky today told me that he got good news today about a paper this morning, 2 in the morning or whatever, about a paper that he presented last year at the Summer Institute, which was discussed. Go ahead and tell me.
International newspaper, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Germany.
So these sorts of things happen year after year, and it's just fabulous to see work in progress, as Maria is telling us. Sometimes we present more finished work, and sometimes we present work in progress, and I think that's not to say that this is going to be disorganized or BBS. So we'll finish with something that's entirely disorganized. We have a paper taking off from Vern Smith's title, The Safety Cases of the Two Smiths, Vernon Smith and Adam Smith, by Maria.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here one more time. The Summer Institute did have a major influence on me intellectually, and apparently now even. 30 more minutes, hours. So yes, this paper is attempts to link Adam Smith and Vernon Smith. It does build on Vernon Smith. not mistake, what I would like to do is, first of all, if you have any question at any time, do interrupt me, don't wait for me. What I would like to do is, with this paper, is to bring together experimental literature and 18th century literature. And in particular, I'm trying to see how knowledge of 18th century can help explain some results in experimental literature. So what we have from some of the experimental literature is that the amount of cooperation that we see in industrialized societies among humans is significantly and systematically more than what we predict from here. So there's a bunch of experiments that ranging from automatic technique, public good games, all sorts of games show that in industrialized societies, students in labs cooperate tremendously, given the theory. We also know from field experiments in foraging societies that also in non-industrialized societies, there is a very high level of cooperation, not as high as in industrialized societies. So Henrik, in particular, John Henrik and a bunch of his colleagues did work in villages that had no very good markets, and that's what they found, that there is cooperation. It's not as, the results were very interesting because the level of cooperation that they found was different from the one in industrial societies. It was still present, but in different forms. And the same games played in foraging societies give us results that are cooperation, but less than industrial societies. And what they show is that the almost perfect variable that they are able to see with some effect is exposure to markets. These exposure to markets, right? The other interesting result that we have from experiments is experiments with monkeys. So non-human primates also show some cooperation. So there are experiments where a monkey helps another monkey to get some food, the second monkey helps the first monkey to get some food as well. So I help you, you help me. I scratch your back, you scratch my back, sort of activity monkeys. And also other experiments where a monkey is given grapes and the another monkey is given cucumbers. Grapes are preferred food than cucumbers for monkeys. And so the monkey with grapes, for no reason, it's just like there's a completely arbitrary decision of the experiment to give the grapes to one monkey. The monkey with the grapes is very happy it's a grape, and the monkey with the cucumber gets furious. So it gets upset, starts screaming, yelling, throw the cucumber, because the explanation is there is a sense of fairness that the monkey have. They see that the monkey with the grapes received the grape unfairly or undeservedly. So the monkey with the cucumber shows this sense of fairness by making a positive choice they got out of the cucumber. So we have all this cooperation in human and non-human primates, and the question is, where does the cooperation come from? I'm going to use the term cooperation and fairness basically interchangeably. It may not technically be the same, that's a more good way to handle it. So the standard story that we receive from standard economic theory or experimental economic theory is an evolutionary story. So we learn reciprocity, both negative and positive. So you do something nice to me, I do something nice to you. You do something bad to me, I do something bad to you. We do it once, we do it twice. In the long run, we are able to see that that works. And so we develop cooperation through rules of reciprocity. If you want to put one step further, you rather than on the individual level, you have a small group. And in small groups, we're able to have rules of reciprocity enforced because of low monitoring costs. So even if I decide to cheat in a very small community, everybody somebody will, or at least somebody will notice the machine, so it will be punished. So non-cooperation is easy to enforce if you have a small group, because monitoring costs are very small. So then when we go from small community, large anonymous societies like industrial societies, we have the problem of increasing monitoring costs. Because now it's much more difficult to see, detect, and punish the factor. So how do we arrive to cooperation in large anonymous societies? The standard story is we evolved so that the punishment is not direct, but we have internalized rules of cooperation. And so that we are able to have large societies with immunity and still observe cooperation that we observe in industrial societies. So that's the standard story. And to me, that is a wonderful story, and we learn a lot from it. But there are two things that are not explained.
One thing you said about cooperation has to do with the size of the group.
Mm-hmm.
But is that also what happened, being tested in experiments, that they change, because you're talking about large group,
Mm-hmm.
and what I know about experiments in economics is that they never run with such a large group. So how do they know that the size may be some kind of influence?
This is just like evolutionary story. Like why in New York City there are crimes.
Okay,
but
that's not related to the experiment.
entire city is destroyed. Why are we able to function and to function relatively well, to grow prosperous, even though you may never know what I do when I'm here, right? So in that sense, the idea is we are able to go from personal to impersonal exchange with this internalization of local operations. Right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, but it's not related to the experiment.
No.
Okay, that's
Just a
it.
story that is being told of why do we go from, why do we observe so much cooperation in industrialized societies, given the result in the experiments that we have. Right? So the idea is, well, we bring into the experimental room our culture, our set of values, our internalization of values that we have. Is this okay? Yeah. So as I said, like the story is a very compelling story. It's based basically exclusively on a self-interest base. So we go from, I understand that I benefit from reciprocating your behavior, then the monitoring costs add to it, and then we eventually internalize the story. So it is a strictly self-interest based story that leads us to shift to industrialized societies. But the problem to me is on two grounds. First, if there is this direct link between non-human primates and human primates, why there is so much difference in the level of complexity that we have in human societies, at least industrial societies, and non-human primates? Why don't we observe a court system among chimps?
So what's concerned?
A court system, a jurisdiction, a court of judges. There are some example of punishment of some deviant behavior, but we don't observe in chimp the same kind of structure, administration of justice that we have in human societies. We don't have the same kind of complexity that we have in human societies. So my question is, why are chimp closer to us, given that there is some sort of similarity, at least a cooperation level? And the other question that I think is missing from the story is, how do we internalize these rules of cooperation? Because all the stories go, well, we develop a rule of cooperation, we understand it individually, but then somehow we internalize them. So that how is something that I think is worth explaining. And I claim that a way to explain, or I'm exploring the possibility of explaining the missing link between chimp and the non-human primates and human, and the way in which we internalize rules of behavior through 18th century literature, in particular Adam Smith, and in particularly the role of imagination in Smith. So if we are able to questions. What is still missing, though, is a way to incorporate imagination in an evolutionary story. And I have no answer to it, but what I'm saying is it would be wonderful if in the evolutionary story that we already tell, are able to incorporate somehow the role of imagination. Because that's not something that comes out straightforward from this linear story that we have. So why does this line of research matter at all? Well, to me it matters for at least 3 reasons. First, because, as I said, the models that we have so far are powerful, are not powerful enough. They can be more powerful if we are able to incorporate some extra tools that we have available from the 18th century. Imagination being the most important one I'm thinking right now, as well as the role of sympathy and praiseworthiness, as we will see as I will show. The other thing that I think is relevant is that the experimental results are showing that commerce not only makes us rich, but makes us more cooperative somehow. And that's something that I think is worth exploring a little bit more. For both claims of Redbox, I'm saying if you read the 18th century literature, you find a lot of hints, a lot of claims, a lot of intuitive explanations that can help us incorporate those kind of analysis in the current analysis.
How do we know other primates don't have imagination?
I'm going to
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm going to use the example that they use in the experimental literature. So, what I want to do first, let me step back first. I am taking the results from the experiment as a starting point. So I'm not going to question the methodology of, especially the monkey experiments. I'm just saying this is what they've done, this is what they claim. I'm starting from there. That said,
just for information, the kinds of experiments with monkeys you're referring to are, say, Frans de Waal's kind of experiments.
what?
Frans de Waal. Frans
Yeah.
de Waal, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how, according to Smith, how does a society, how is it possible that society does not disintegrate? How is it possible that autonomous individuals stick together and not have a Hobbesian environment in which the strongest grabs and representatives work? And according to Smith, but don't get me wrong, Smith has the same kind of argument that we find in the evolutionary story. So he has a literature story just as much as we find it in the literature story now. But he also has another story. The other story is based on justice. So Smith claims that justice is the main pillar that upholds the whole edifice of society. And if it is removed, the immense fabric of human society must in a moment crumble into atoms. So according to Smith, the glue that keeps individuals together in society is justice. So the question is, where does justice come from? So Smith explains, or at least offers a possible explanation to it. And he says, well, justice comes from a natural sense of ill-deservedness, which is often is a feeling of resentment. So, in order to enforce the observation of justice, therefore nature has implanted in the human breast that consciousness of ill-deserved. And if you want to keep reading, that just tells you how we naturally react to something bad, and that gives us this resentment that leads into justice. And if I can ask another question, so that's how does this ill-deservedness or resentment work? Smith explains that as well, and claims that it works through sympathy. So we resent others through a sympathetic process. And that's what allows us to have justice. Now there are two levels of sympathy that he deals with. There is sympathy that is more of an emotional contagion, and sympathy that is an imaginative process. The emotional contagion is not something that is going to be relevant for justice. The imaginative process is. So the emotional contagion sympathy is simply, I see somebody smile, I smile as well. I see somebody cry, I cry as well. Right? It's just like an immediate reaction to physical reaction. What is interesting for us, for my claim instead, is the role of imagination in sympathy. So it's more than simple contagion, just like a disease. That was the term that was used in the 18th century. It is not just like a disease that is transmitted, it's like contagion. It is something that is processed by the individual through imagination. So I am going to cry when somebody cries, not just because the person cries, but because I put myself in the place of the other person, and I imagine myself in that situation, so I start crying as well. So it's not just a reaction, a passive reaction, it's an active reaction that requires some cognitive action on my side, because I actively have to put myself in the place of the other. And Smith is explicit about it, but it's only through the imagination that we can do it. So, according to Smith, we use imagination so that we can sympathize with others. Sympathy allows us to have resentment, and resentment allows us to have justice. And justice is the base of social cohesion and social cooperation. That's a Smithian story. Now, what happened if we use this Smithian story in the experimental results? Well, the standard story that we have with non-human primates, or one of them at least, that shows fairness among non-human primates, is a story of an experiment with two monkeys. One monkey, the one that I just said, one monkey is given the grape, the other monkey is given the cucumber. And the focus on that explanation is on the second monkey, the monkey that's given the cucumber. Because that's the monkey that screams and yells and protests because it's unfair that the other monkey got the grape without any reason, without deserving. So usually the story of fairness is an evolutionary process derives from the second monkey, the monkey that resents the grapes of the other.
To be sure, monkey 1 is giving grapes to monkey 2.
No. The experimental, a human being gives some grapes to monkey 1 and grapes to monkey 2. I'm sorry, grapes to monkey 1 and cucumbers to monkey 2.
I know.
The two monkeys can see each other. So monkey 2 sees that monkey 1 has grapes for no reason. He didn't do anything. He didn't deserve that grape, and I got the cucumber. So the monkey with the cucumbers protests.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to pick you up.
But as far as I remember, there is also a setting in which, so there's a setting in which they can see one another, but monkey 1 cannot give anything to monkey 2. But there is also a setting in which monkey 1 can give something to monkey 2, and it does.
That's only if monkey 1 is helped by monkey 2 to get the cucumber, to get the grapes.
Is there
It's a different
control?
experiment.
Is there a control in which monkey 1 somehow deserves the grapes,
Yes.
and there's no protest when it's deserved?
That's it.
No, I don't mean when
And
they're
the other-
cooperating. I mean when they
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
he works for it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And I think the experiment that you're talking about is where monkey 1 and monkey 2 need to both work together to
Exactly.
get food.
Yeah.
So there's like both have to push to get food to monkey 1, and then
Monkey 1
monkey
shares.
1 could eat the food without problems. If monkey 2 protests, monkey 1 helps the food to go to monkey 2's cage. Yes,
Yeah.
that's a different experiment. Here, the experimenter just give food to both monkeys. They do nothing, just the regular food portion.
But you can't infer from that experiment that there is no justice system. It's just the setting, because if you look at other, studies from the wild, he is talking about justice system among these bonobos. I never get that right. And he claims there is a justice system. So I'm a bit puzzled.
If you want, maybe that's too much of a catchy sentence, but just think of the level of complexity that we have in human society.
Well, sure, but yeah,
Even
that may have
in the
different reasons.
approximation, if there's so much that monkey should, the similarity between monkey and us in this story, then my claim is simply, why aren't they behaving more like we do?
Yeah.
I'm a bit worried about how you're using evolutionary arguments, because Monkey 2 and Eric share a common ancestor, but it's not the case that humans have evolved from, I think you mean to be saying chimpanzees actually, not monkeys, but so be it.
This experiment that we done with monkeys.
Yeah, with monkeys, well, we certainly didn't evolve from monkeys, but we do have common ancestors of monkeys. But if you then want to say what the right way to pose the evolutionary question is, so what we really want to figure out is what the common ancestor might have had, and what explains the deviation between us and them, and the monkey and them. And it's very hard to make positive arguments, so that's somewhat easier to make negative arguments.
What I'm simply trying to say is that despite what we have in common, there are some differences, and one of the differences that we should take into consideration in our story is the role of imagination. That's my basic claim. And Smith has a presence in human and the stories that we have inside John.
Well, if I can complicate things even further, Eric, I mean, the story may not be completely genetic in that I know there's some anthropologists who have suggested some of the non-primate kinds of behaviors that humans exhibit might be due to the fact that they think humans and dogs started living together as much as 150,000 years ago, and we learned certain behaviors from dogs.
When you're offering evolutionary arguments, the logic of
Yeah.
where things come in is actually very hard to say. It's much harder to say why some things are absent rather than to say why things have come in, because there are in fact multiple sources of evidence and of co-evolution as well, as Jessica rightly points out. So I'm, for the sake of argument, keep going again.
Maybe she
Well, perhaps you should go.
Yeah.
Even this experiment with the one monkey, so you have this beam, there is food on one end of the beam, not on the other end. There are these two rows, and they have to pull both together to get the food to the one monkey. Why would you say this? I would say this. I find it plausible to see, say, monkey 2 pulling the rope, that there is some imagination at work here in monkey 2 about what will happen afterwards. So I'm not convinced that these monkeys are a lack of the imagination.
Well, maybe we can finish your argument.
Sure, yeah, but that's why I said. That's why I said perhaps I should.
And after that, we don't let people finish.
And I asked for it, so that's fine. But yeah, the way I think is interesting is actually not to look at the second monkey behavior, but the first monkey behavior. So you have an act of injustice that is resented by monkey 2. But what is interesting to me is what happens to monkey 1. Monkey 1 keeps eating his grapes without problem. It just like looks over, doesn't care, keeps eating. And given that monkey 2 gets upset and throws the cucumber away out of rage, monkey 1 grabs the cucumbers and eats the cucumber as well.
We've all had bosses like that.
So that to me is an interesting part of the story, because that is something that if you use Smithian logic is not going to be present. Even in the weakest introduction of sympathy, which is the contagion, emotional monkey 2 is trying desperately to get his grapes. So if you introduce emotional contagion, monkey 1 should try as well, which doesn't happen. The major problem comes when you introduce sympathy as an imaginary process. Because what Smith would say is that monkey 1 should actually share the grape, even if undeservedly received, should share the grape with monkey 2. And if you want to push the argument even further, monkey 1 should give up, I'm making this up because that's not the experiment, but should give up a banana to get grapes to monkey 2. Because the Smithian story is, I am willing to share my grapes if I see that the other person cries because he doesn't have any. And I'm even willing to sacrifice myself to give the grapes to somebody who doesn't have it. So that is the missing part, I think, in the evolutionary story that Adam Smith said can help us understand as far as the differences between human behavior and non-human primates. And so, in the Smithian story, we have cooperation and fairness because of the role of imagination. Now, I'm not saying that self-interest doesn't play a role. I'm just saying, on top of that, we have to consider also imagination and the pleasure that we receive from mutual sympathy, which is, again, builds on the presence of imagination. What is, I think, distinctive in Smith is that Smith does not collapse sympathy into self-interest and is explicit about it. So the fact that we receive mutual sympathy as a pleasure in itself and not something that is utilitarian based, is not based on self-interest, is explicitly told, we are explicitly told so by Smith. So Smith tells us that what we derive, the pleasure we derive from self-interest is not, from sympathy, is not derived from self-interest at all. And even the arguments that can be made on praiseworthiness, Smith explicitly tells us they are not the same as esteem or fame as presented in current literature, because they are all based on utilitarian ground. I behave in a certain way to build a reputation because it's useful. Smith tells us, no, that's not the case. Those are two very different processes. So, given this story in Smith, then can Smith answer also the other question, how do we internalize the rules of cooperation? How do we go from personal to impersonal cooperation? And Smith has a very compelling story, because Smith is able to tell us why we internalize rules of cooperation both at the individual level and at the social level. The story that we have for internalization of rules of cooperation at the individual level is the story of the partial spectator, right? The partial spectator is a story that tells us we are able to behave in a way that is cooperative because we understand that is good to cooperate. So you have this beautiful story of internalization of rules of cooperation at the individual level. And again, the story of the development of the partial spectator is a story based on the imagination. Right? Because I see something wrong is done to me. I resent the wrongdoer. I see that something wrong is done to Kevin by Eric. And
yeah, I will resent that. My footnotes are always very gentle.
And I see that Kevin resented, and I see that I don't want to be the object of resentment like Eric is. And how do I do it? Because I imagine myself in the place of Eric, and I see the reaction that Kevin gives. And I don't want to be in that place. But I'm able to say I don't want to be in that place because I imagine myself in the place of Eric, being the object of Kevin's resentment. So, yeah.
imagine, I don't know, this is the monkey one. Imagine because I don't see how you link sympathy and imagination.
Could you speak up a bit?
I don't see how you link sympathy and imagination to this sharing or distribution. Let's imagine I walk with Eric to our dorms, okay? And I find $1 million and Eric finds a cucumber. I don't know whether applying sympathy and imagination, should I be willing to give $100,000 to Eric? I mean, that's the point. I mean, making the analogy with the monkeys. Why should the monkey one be willing to give grapes using sympathy and?
What you observe in experiment with humans is that if the experimenter gives
Control. You have some.
It's just like if I give you money for no reason, you just find it. Like you win money by picking up a number of a hat. You are willing to share with somebody else who's paired with you even if you don't see him, you don't know him, he's not a friend of yours. So humans do share when they're giving grapes or money.
I'm not quite sure you're right. I'm really not quite sure. If you have a lottery and there is money on the one lottery and say the computer on the other, and the one who wins the lottery, he won't share.
The experimental results show different things.
All their families find, or they find that everybody from their most distant parts of their family come asking them for money. That's well documented. How people win really big lotteries and friends and.
Oh yeah, they all show up, but that doesn't mean they're sharing.
The Sneakin story would tell you that you would share, right? Because how does imagination and sympathy works? You see that Eric is like, well, yeah, I can use some of your money to share, and you feel bad about him not having anything because you put yourself in his place, and you think, how would I feel if Eric won $1 million and I'm without a cucumber? So you give him some money. That's the Sneakin story, which would explain the cooperation that we observe among humans in science.
Wouldn't kind of the whole evolutionary process suggest that, like, if this is true, then it would have, like, certain people who behave, like, obviously there's a scale of how much we're willing to share. So, like, wouldn't this have preference to people who are willing to share more? And so
the problem is, how do you get there? Is the first step that is missing. The monkey keeps eating without being bothered by the other one screaming. And my question is, how do we get to the first level of sharing? We need to have some sort of initial step so that we can get going on it. And my claim is that can be given if you introduce imagination like Smith does.
It's related to the discussion. It's not bringing in new elements, but maybe it's also imagination isn't always towards another person, human being, or can it also be imagination towards another situation? And if that's the case, then that solves the lottery problem, because he's lucky that time, I'm lucky the next time, or he's in that situation, but probably I will be in that situation next. So that's my question to you: is in Smith's case always the other person, which I can imagine the feelings, or is it also about situations and settings?
Yeah, framing is important.
But I think what you're asking is, if I know that eventually Eric will get $1 million and I will get the cucumber by walking back to the rooms, will I be willing to share, or will Leon be willing to share $1 million? That's what you're saying, right? Because I can imagine the same situation done over again, and I will be the unlucky one and Eric will be the lucky one. That I am really not able to answer. I would, because that's not something that I don't know.
I was thinking of an opposite situation, like this. Instead of thinking of grapes or money, think of punishment. If I see you are punished because you did something wrong. Another person that goes in your shoes is pushed to collaborate with society, not to have the same punishment you had. Maybe your logic is easily to be used in the case of punishment, not in the case of having something more, but as an incentive not to do something wrong. But I wasn't thinking of this. I'm not sure.
If I understand what you're asking is, I'm trying to place it in a way that could be without parallel to Smith and some experimental setting. You cannot do this in a lab because the research will not allow you to.
No.
But the idea would be if I unfairly punish somebody, would the other person do something to prevent that punishment? Is that what you're asking, right? Among humans was done before he was subject.
Yes.
And then Smith has a story. I mean, you have two people who have worked for years on showing how Smith is listening.
But I am reading a book on a population living on the mountain of Albania, who has their particular environment and they know, and no government was able in the last 7th century to change anything there. And they have this kind of I kill you if you do wrong, and so the other doesn't kill you. And
that's a system of justice that's made by the people that we problem. The question is, would monkey behave the same way? Okay. And if not, what makes a difference between their behavior and ours? And my guess is if monkey do not behave like we do, it is because that imagination doesn't exist.
There are lots of differences between monkeys and people and other sorts of animals. And the way you pose the question, sort of why monkeys don't have a legal system, depends on their having a number of capacities which they might not have that are prerequisite to, and it might not be the imagination to be the particular capacity which is at fault. And so I'm glad that Jessica brought up dogs, because there's a point in the early on in the Wealth of Nations where I was trying to say, what's the source of the division of labor? What's the source of trade? Dogs cooperate, but you've never seen them truck and barter and carry on a fair trade. And the reason for that is they don't have language. Monkeys don't have language. It's very hard to construct a legal system without language. But of course, it may play into your story because it may be that you can't have the kind of imagination that's necessary without language either. But there's at least that other bit of Smith from the other book that I think is relevant to him.
Now I have to say, which is like a way to defend myself, or at least to justify some of the language in the presentation. The way in which I phrased it here, not in the paper, is much stronger. So in the paper I would make the claim why the can't be legal system. Here it was just like I need a catchy phrase to do it.
Sure.
But I do want to see the differences. Why don't we observe the same kind of complexity that we have in human societies, in non-human societies, even if there are so many other parallels?
I'd like to follow up on Kevin. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out, in terms of the analytical structure of what you're trying to do here, what you're trying to do by placing, these experiments on monkeys and a discussion of Adam Smith on imagination, in this context. In that, I'm not sure my understanding of Adam Smith and imagination is illuminated by sort of using these experiments to sort of introduce
It's
that.
not that illuminated.
Right.
I'm just saying that the presence of the imagination is missing.
No. I mean analytically in terms of what you're trying to do as a scholar here. I'm not sure I understand Adam Smith any better because I've thought about these experiments on monkeys.
Oh, no, indeed.
Right. And I'm also not sure that anything about what I understand about monkeys is sort of improved by reading Adam Smith either. So I'm kind of wondering why you put these, how in a analytical sense these, what I tend to think of as rather two different areas of endeavor actually in some ways speak to each other. Just because, I could propose all sorts of reasons why monkeys don't have a justice system besides Adam Smith. I think a lot of linguists would argue it's because they don't have language. A lot of cognitive psychologists would say they just lack certain cognitive capacities. They might suggest that 3-year-olds also lack those capacities. If you had a society of 3-year-olds, you wouldn't get a justice system either. So, I'm just trying to understand what you're trying to do in bringing these elements together.
The easiest answer is because Adam Smith is probably not linguistic. I study Adam Smith and not language, so it is easy for me to answer with what I know, which is Adam Smith and not language. So that's an easy answer.
But you also study animal behavior?
No.
Okay, so
No, that's what I'm saying. Like I'm not saying that this is the only answer that we can have. I'm saying this is one extra way to
But I guess
understand.
if you're an Adam Smith scholar, why do you need the monkeys to help you understand that?
I don't need the monkey for the sense in.
Okay.
What I'm saying is we have a set of literature that has been brought together before, not by me, but by Vernon Smith. This is why it's Vernon Smith and Adam Smith. Vernon Smith is the one who says use Adam Smith to understand, and Adam Smith is theory of moral sentiments, to understand experimental results. Okay? And they stopped the argument 10 years ago at the resentment level. And what I'm saying is Smith opened a huge door that nobody had walked much into. Vernon Smith opened that huge door, and nobody has walked much farther into it. And I'm saying this is a huge field that has been unexplored. That's what I'm saying. And that there is a huge possibility for Smith scholars to use their expertise in trying to understand results from experimental literature that with standard economic theory you wouldn't be able to explain. That's basically what I'm saying.
I think for me, what I like about what you're trying to get at is you're trying to argue that at some level there's something going on in Smith which is not consequentialist. It's not utilitarian, which to me Smith would call instincts. That humans have certain instincts for cooperation and for resentment and so on, but they're not calculated. And that to me is how you can use Adam Smith to get into the behavior of these games and experiments, is to try to look at instincts.
Yeah, and in particular, what I'm hoping, what I am screaming in a sense, is to the people who work in evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, that do evolutionary stuff, is can you tell us something more about imagination? Where does it come from? How can we count for the fact that humans have imagination and we don't observe as obviously as in humans imagination in other non-human primates or in other animals? But at least if they have it, show us that they have it. So that we seem to be the only group of animals that have imagination. And imagination gave us so much more, because look at what we are able to accomplish as far as complexity, social complexity. So where does it come from? Smith doesn't tell us where does it come from, just that nature gave us imagination, or we start from imagination. But I'm saying if you introduce imagination into your story, you're able to have a much more compelling evolutionary story than what we have right now. Does that start?
Yeah.
There is something which supports that story, because in biology there's this idea that what human beings distinguish from the monkeys is this mirror gene. And so that could be somehow could relate that to that idea of imagination.
Right.
But therefore, I just want to come back to that the idea of imagination, that you maybe need some broadening up, that you really think about what is to be imagined, and to work that more out than just that it is only the something psychological or emotional. So that's so there is some kind of literature already what trying to connect, what's quite similar to what you are
Right. The mirror neurons are closer to what would be called indicative sensory emotional contagion.
Emotional?
Contagion. If they exist. And which is already a huge step. But still, from it, how do we get from emotional contagion to actually imagining myself in your shoes as opposed to just smiling because it's mine? So, yeah. That's I will give it, don't worry.
The modern specialists translate sympathy as read sympathy as co-affective. So it's correlated. So that sympathy is vibration. It's something you can find from Stoic physics all the way to Shaftesbury and beyond too. And so one of Smith's contributions was sympathy as projection, sympathy as imagination. So this projection, imagination is one of the things that Smith did with his sympathetic machinery that distinguishes him from other folks. And so that it's sort of looking carefully at how Smith differs from Hume, how Smith differs from the resources. What tricks, what machinery does Smith have to bring on this problem that makes it particularly useful to us?
And as my knowledge of what of course but the thing that seems to be different is in the girls' imagination. Because
Really, I read your paper last night. I got very excited and read my age, but I got to do that.
The first summary to fatality.
But I may say I was struck because about 8 years ago I read it was a book of prehistory farming, and I faced these questions and linked it and evolution. Evolution is not going to happen in that's going to take a long time. So these experiments, why does monkey 1 and monkey 2 do that? When the speciation of the human, of the hominids from the chimpanzee, the hominids had all the characteristics of the chimpanzee, except they began to grow brains, bigger brains. And that created a big problem at some point, because all chimpanzees, apes, and monkeys have one golden rule. Women feed themselves and their children, and men feed themselves. The male feeds itself. That's the rule. There's common law there. But with the growing brain, the women, the female of the hominid species, the first was 12 of them together, couldn't feed the demand on the growing brains for their infants. And that was a crisis. And if nothing had happened, the hominid that did disappear for a million years, would have been it. But it only requires a pair bond for reproductive success. And that happened, and that's the great accidental thing that we're all here for today. Pair bonds were got there, where the male stopped feeding just himself, he had to feed the children as well. And that because it's not a question of collecting food, there's other things, gathering, scavenging, whatever. Now that led to these kind of questions of why that went away. And reproductive success, which went through as all the hominid species, all 12 of them, to reclaim on, some lasted 1 million, some 2 million years, resolves this problem, but some didn't continue doing it, some did. If you didn't go and feed the growing brain, was 20% of your energy that comes from the brain alone, there was going to be no success. Your children would just die, eventually you would die. And so a lot of these experiments with apes or there while interested in illustrating the difference between them and humans, are not helping solve the evolutionary question. And reciprocity, which is in chimpanzees, was in the hominids, and that developed the quasi-bite. You will see in chimpanzees that some chimps reciprocate with other chimps on grooming, and other chimps just groom because the female alpha or the male alpha have battered them into doing it. And they create pair, not sexual pair bonds, but friendship bonds. And it's that kind of cooperation that developed in the what was happening. I put this in bargaining terms. That was the quasi-bargain. What moved into a bargain there was that as those groups that form cooperative groups, an extended family, if one of the males did not go out and help feed the family, they got the ultimate sanction was death from the other ones. And that began to put people into the line there. And once you got cooperation going, where to enjoy the benefit, whatever that was, sex or otherwise, you had to pay the cost. You were stress of cost, and you were expected to pay the cost. But as you reach a certain level, you've got to actually pay the cost if you're going to get the benefit. It reverses around, and that created the bargaining thing there. Now, I've got to send that. It's quite like one manuscript. I got turned down by anthropological people on the grounds that they didn't learn economics, and I got drowned by economists on the grounds that nothing to do with anthropology. So the solution to that problem, that big place, there is in my prehistory of bargaining. I'd be delighted to share it because it might. It's not. Why does an ape have imagination? It's where did humans get their imagination and all those levels of cognition? And that's the question. It's pointless doing these experiments with these elementary primates there. It'd be much better to pursue the thing there of how imagination evolved and developed in human beings.
Yes, I did ask you. The other, I'm just going to finish up. The other ways in which Smith claims we internalize rules of cooperation is at the social level, which is the way in which we generate rules of conduct. And again, it is through the role of imagination and through the symbolic process by looking at how others universally disapprove certain kind of behavior. We generate the rules so that we are able to avoid being the object of universal approbation or disapprobation. Is the other problem that I said, or the other interesting result that I said comes from experimental results is the difference, cross-cultural differences on level of cooperation. So we observe a universal predisposition to cooperate, but the forms of cooperation are different. The highest level of cooperation observed is in industrialized society. Foraging societies that have no market exposure or little market exposure have lower level of cooperation, given the same things. Has it explained something like that? And the answer again is yes. Smith tells us that commerce has a similarity effect. Customs and morals do change in time. The more commercialized societies are, the more humane our customs become. So in pre-commercial society, we abandon our children after they are sick to be devoured by wild beasts, while now we don't do it anymore. The administration of justice, the regular administration of justice is something that we observe with the development of commerce. And again, the justice part is something that comes out. Smith tells us also that this regular administration of justice as a byproduct of commercial society is something that comes out not by him. He's not the one who discovers this benefit of commerce, but David Hume. And David Hume writes extensively in claiming how the introduction of commerce makes us more humane, more sociable. So we are able to have a a story also to account for the differences cross-cultural. So how do we account for an evolutionary story that is more complete in a sense than the one we have? And how do we account for an explanation of how we internalize cooperation? Bernard Smith tells us 10 years ago now, yeah. 3 years ago.
No.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
I'm sorry.
To look at Adam Smith, and Adam Smith tells us to look at imagination, sympathy, and our desire to be personal.
Thanks, Maria. Why don't we take maybe 5 minutes for comments if there are any additional ones, but if there aren't, we can just go ahead and break.
There's coffee outside.
There is a comment. I have